Hello and welcome to another edition of the NRS Insights podcast. I'm John Lofstock, and today I'm joined by an old friend, someone I have worked with. God, it's almost 3 decades, I think. Lou Maiellano, he was the president of TAZ Marketing and Consulting. Lou and I are going to be talking a little bit about tobacco and a bunch of other things today, but to give some insight on Lou, he has been a retailer, he has been a supplier, he has been a consultant. There is really nobody in the industry that understands the tobacco category quite the way Lou does, and with all the intricacies. So, very happy to have Lou here today. How are you, Lou?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
So, you're
No
one
rain
of the few.
today. No rain today, so that's a good day, I guess.
Yeah, right. New Jersey, same thing. We've been raining in New Jersey, I think, all summer. So you are one of the few people that I could actually begin an interview with and talk about the 1998 Master Settlement Agreement. We remember the industry before MSA and certainly the industry after MSA. And I bring that up because I remember our conversations back then, and um, it's a very different category. So why don't if you can, just walk us through the journey of, where we stand today and how everything started to change since 1998.
Well, I mean, I still remember speaking to the wholesaler show with about 500 people in the audience, and I kind of like was a futuristic, looking at what was headed our way. Folks I remember thought I was like high on nicotine because I was sharing different opportunities that were out there. And I also presented where that industry was, where it was totally dominated by cigarette companies, the manufacturers. I can remember making massive income from RDAs because of the sets that I had, these manufacturers in that position. So what I began to look at was like, how do we morph into where this is the future, and seeing different products. I had actually the honor of becoming the master guy that created a no smoke zone. So
Hmm.
I was looking at like anywhere between a 6 foot back bar and maybe a 12, 14-foot back bar, and how retailers could merchandise the products that were out there, especially with the tobacco industry. And I'm going to talk about combustible cigarettes that was declining, and pretty much every year. It's just like clockwork. Here we go. It's going to go down again another 3 to 4%. But hey, Philip Morris and BAT, RJR, Lorillard, all those companies, some of them got bought by each other. But the reality that happened was is that their volumes were going down. And what I looked at was the opportunity to grow the other parts of tobacco and sit there and think about having a customer come in and get what they wanted, not what the manufacturers wanted you to buy. So I was always looking outside the box. I had a great love of moist smokeless tobacco. I also was very involved with the whole concept of reduction of harm. Yes, unfortunately, cigarettes, burning tobacco is harmful. You can't argue that. It just is, and but there are other products out there like moist smokeless tobacco that reportedly have about a 98% reduction in harm. And also, as I was looking at the moist smokeless tobacco, I was looking at the cigars and looking at flavored cigars and looking at, the smokeless tobacco category. And I was beginning to say, how is this set going to change? And then I walk into a Wawa down in Florida last week, and I look at a back bar and I go, oh my, that's what I predicted back in 2013. To sit there and see that the cigarette set had reduced to
Hmm.
only 6 feet, not 10 feet, 6 feet. And I always used to sit there and say, well, I don't really need 10 foot of a row of Marlboro going across it. I didn't need that many, facings to call out Marlboro. Um, so I began to sit there and work with these sets and work with retailers and share the whole thing about um, giving each category its space rather than just a hodgepodge. If you've been in a convenience store, you're going to see that the counters are just jammed with everything, And at one point in time,
Mhm.
there were cigarettes all over, there was tobacco all over the counters, and of course, legislation made that all an old tune. So, um, the other day when I walked through, I saw 6-foot cigarettes.
Mhm.
I saw 4-foot smokeless tobacco. I also saw a 4-foot set for vapor, and then, believe it or not, because one of the things I always talked about was alternative. What other products out there deliver the satisfaction that they're looking for from cigarettes? And of course, I'm out there looking at a area that's just exploding out there, and that would be nicotine pouches.
Mhm.
I can remember working with Swedish Match many years ago and telling them, "What are you waiting on?" They had a product called General, which was in Sweden, and it's a pouch. It's stronger than Copenhagen, which I know. I had a buddy who was my rep for moist smokeless from USST.
Mhm.
He told me, "Don't try this.
Mhm.
You don't want to try it." And I'm like, because it'll just knock you silly. So I began to see how the category was evolving into more of a offer of all that's all out there. So I know one of the things that we had talked about was the fact that, I know I'm going to look at it, it's like, you know, the category continually is changing. Not as drastically as it did in the past, okay, because of consolidation and also because of, unfortunately, the FDA, because they have, made it so difficult to bring new products to the market. I wish I was more simplified than, it is today. But one of the things I've always talked to folks about in my presentations and in my writing would be the fact that, working working with retailers uh, is to embrace change. Just realize it's going to happen, and that not to get like overly, oh my God, here we go again, but be ahead of it, get ahead of it. Another point I wrote here was that um,
Well, I want to say that's
stay a,
an
stay a student of the business, study the business, and be willing to change. So,
and this is important, Lou, because even with now we see, Juul's been in the news and obviously vape has been in the news, but the category didn't exist. Right around the time you were starting to talk about this, you kind of knew about it, you'd heard about it, and I don't want to, go into the history, but I mean there was some shady, in the beginning, vape was the wild, wild west with all the
oh, it
crazy
was.
flavors, and I mean
Well,
you.
hey, John, in 2008 in Florida at the AWMA show, I introduced to 500 participants in that seminar the world coming. And it had
Mhm.
to do, I introduced at that point in time the electronic cigarette. I take claim for that,
Yeah.
and I knew all the issues of, I used to tell the vapor industry that like you're your worst enemy.
Yeah.
I mean, you're fighting with each other, you badmouth each other. And some of them, they were just bad products. I mean, they just, they were made in the bathtub, of an individual making their like liquids. So,
Do you remember walking around the NAC show and you'd go to a vape and they would be like, no, the FDA likes us. They trust us. The FDA doesn't trust them. You didn't know who to trust.
hey, John, do you remember I wrote the article about the 10 lies that the vapor world had? And that was one of them. The fact of the matter is that, there were, I know you asked me to write an article. And you know what? We never wrote it, but I did it on my blog because I didn't want to, if it was pretty vicious in the fact that it said, you guys are just, making a faulty product. And they lied. I mean, And I still remember the big lie that, oh, the patent holder, they're okay with us. They gave us a green light.
Yeah.
Oh, they
No,
did.
they didn't.
I mean, come on. Fontem had your on your eyesight.
But they didn't know that you knew that. That was the problem.
Well, they didn't know what I knew. And
Yeah.
because I kept quiet, I played dumb. That was the best way. I asked questions. I would go to a trade show. I still remember, going to a trade show. I still remember getting into it with a guy that was a part of one of the associations where he said, electronic cigarettes are 100% safe. And I said, you can't say that. And
Yeah.
that's the kind of things that's going to haunt you. And then the big one I always said is like, I know you don't want to hear it, Mr. Vapor Company, but one day Big Tobacco is going to own this. And sure enough, that's what's happened. With Juul and with, Enjoy and,
Mhm.
Reynolds, they own the category. Try to get a new product in, you can't, you
And
know.
that's the way it had to play out, I think.
Well,
The
it needed to have control,
mhm.
especially when, like I said, there were folks out there that just were shady. I mean, and then of course, you had, some things that were happening. I believe that vapor is less harmful than combustible tobacco. I do. There's still harm.
Mhm.
There's still some harm there. There's still things that need to be learned. I used to sit there and say, well, how do we know after 10 years of inhaling propylene glycol that we're going to be okay? We didn't know that. We still don't, we still don't know whether there's issues with that. I do know that there are some issues with the vitamin E acetate that's in some of these products that has made them more powerful. I
Mhm.
mean, Juul just came and hit the industry and just crushed it because it was a product that actually, you know, um, it really mimicked smoking a Marlboro. It delivered within that 2 minutes
Mhm.
that nicotine, that feeling that people were looking for from tobacco. So you're right, it did. It needed control, and the same thing with all these things. I just think sometimes that the uh, legislation and all that is just too tough on that industry.
Well, that's a whole other issue. That's something that's never going to change, and that the government and the FDA sees tobacco not as a product, but as a cash cow. That's what
Oh
they look
God, yes, yes. I mean, and you go back to the MSA and you look at all the money. I mean, when you see a carton of cigarettes, just realize how much of that money is going to the government. And I always laugh when I sit there and say, "Well, do you realize how much that pack of cigarettes? How much of that $9 per pack of cigarettes? I
nine
mean, you see
dollars.
that you're in
New York
Jersey,
City,
right?
you're
You're in
you're
New
looking at
York,
16,
and
$18. Yeah.
right? But guess what? So much of it is the taxes
Hmm.
and the MSA agreement.
So, that begs another question I want to get to you before yeah, we wrap up here. And I mean, there's a million questions I want to get to, but the
Oh
important
God, we could
question,
talk for hours. You know that.
the big question is for retailers. So right now, for the independents, stay away from the big guys. Like you mentioned, Wawa knows how to market tobacco, right? These bigger companies know how to market tobacco. So for smaller retailers, for the mom and pops, for the 5, 10 store chains, that valuable real estate, how should they be dividing up that really important space behind the counter and on the counter?
Well, I would tell people all the time, because I mean, I've made some of my life and some of my income off of helping retailers that, just like you're talking about, smaller chains, independents. And there's a and actually, the whole category of just a convenience store, I actually sat there and said, you're paying me. And the biggest thing I could tell you, how about if you just got out of your comfort zone, got in your car, and drove down the street and drove to the corner and go in and check racetrack, go check QT, go check Pilot, go check Wawa, go check Sheets,
Hmm.
Circle K, go look and see what they're doing, okay? Because they're paying category managers a lot of money, and there are some of them that actually really are open to stuff. Now, as an independent, if you look at that and just realize that you could be more advanced because you can make the decisions quicker. You can turn that ship around a lot faster than a big retailer because yeah, they're just like some of them are just afraid to make changes.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid to make a change.
Yep.
Departmentalize your set. Okay. Like I said, smaller cigarettes, because you don't really need them all because that industry's shrinking. Smokeless tobacco is doing hey, it's flat or it's not where it used to be, but it still deserves to have that category. And then you got your cigars. Now, and also, you can also specialize in some of these areas, whereas a lot of the bigger retailers, they ain't doing that. Okay.
Mhm.
And depend on your marketplace. I mean, I had great business. Hey, John, you're in New Jersey. I can remember selling about $1,500 a week in upper line cigars, premium cigars on the New Jersey Turnpike right before you went into Atlantic City. You probably have stopped in that store,
Very,
and
yeah.
there was a rack in there because what I'm telling you when you're talking to independents and all that, you got that freedom, you got the ability to make those decisions. Just be open to these changes. I mean, we've got we've got smokeless tobacco, we've got cigars, and of course we've got this incredible, which I've predicted, pouches. I can remember at the AWMA show in 2008, I can remember pulling out pouches, okay, and said, "Hey, it's just a tea bag. Put it in your mouth." And I've always worked with a whole bunch of different products. Okay. Some of them just the FDA. One of the best products I ever worked with was a hand lotion, and it actually worked. And it was not something that children could use or whatever, if they touched your hand, but it delivered nicotine. And so I was always looking at different things. I was, like today, you've got the potential, and I mentioned this back in 2013 at a show with CSP about THC, marijuana. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, and it's like, oh, people are like, I'll never do that. That ain't happening. A convenience store ain't doing that. And I still remember the whole issue presenting at a CSP show in Vegas about what's the CBD.
Hmm.
There's no retailers out there doing it. I can still remember it was me and there was another person on that panel, and we both disagreed. It'd be like you sit there and saying, nah, no retailers are doing CBD. And I'm there like, oh, yeah, they are. I know for a fact. You
And it
know,
was a booming, yeah, became a booming billion-dollar industry. And,
yes. And I mean, but here's the thing. Sometimes you have to just, be careful how you get into something. Always have an exit strategy because I will tell you that you know some of those products just don't work. And what I mean by that is like you know CBD in my mind is it's expensive,
it
the
is
real
not
good
cheap,
stuff.
right? Absolutely. Yeah. It's
Okay, and
$30
it
rent.
doesn't fit in that model in a convenience store, especially when you don't have the interaction, that you can talk about it. And I can tell you what it does. I can tell you that, hey, CBD, what it does for you, it calms you down. It does this, it does that. But, you have the industry out there with THD or THC, you have marijuana,
Mm.
and even there's retailers out there that dabble in what's with the root. Yeah, I forget what they call it. Um,
Yeah, this new stuff now. I forget what it's called.
and I mean, I'm just trying to think. I can't remember. It's
That's
here in my
okay.
I got a whole bunch of wall over here with all different stuff, but I mean, it's kratom, kratom.
Kratom. Yeah.
Okay, so I would just encourage retailers to do some educations, do some digging, and be careful who you're dealing with. Okay,
Hmm.
and have strong relationships. So the industry again, it's changing. It's not changing as fast as it did in the past, but the reality is there's opportunities out there. And as an independent, I can have an offer that the big retailer down the street doesn't have. that major retailer. So you can learn from them, but you also have some flexibility and some credibility to be able to move your business uh, quicker and maybe be. I mean, I can still remember, John, in New Jersey, where stores with Kratom were selling thousands and thousands of dollars a month. Now, again, there's some concerns about that product, so I just would encourage your listeners and all to look at the newer trends out there. Don't be afraid of them. Just be cautious and careful. And I always said, don't overorder.
Yeah.
I would always tell people, I mean, I knew a retailer that overordered and they bankrupt the company, because guess what? It didn't sell, and they wanted their money back, and that company had to close their doors. So,
So for retail, well, and I wanted to touch on one thing quickly. When you talk about like the growth of cigars and how important that category is, it often gets overlooked, but that opens the door to lighter sales and so many other accessory sales, which have very high margins. And so,
well, I always looked at the fact that tobacco is a driver. It drives people to the store. Yes, in the category mix, it's changing. Okay. Some of that is because that cigarette buyer that goes in, okay. And I was always a fan of, I didn't care what they bought on that back wall. I just wanted to buy. And that's what I taught. I wasn't worried about selling another Marlboro pack. I was worried about selling something, whatever that may be, even if it was a cheap cigar. And at the same time, they can go buy a higher item of margin food,
mhm.
so it's a driver. Someone's going in to get a pack of cigarettes, they're also in there and they smell those hot dogs, or they see a great salad or whatever that is, or they go in and buy a beer. So it's a driver, and it's important to have those people come in. Like I said, I was conscious of the fact that, let's just say you have three workers going in the store, and one of them smokes Marlboro, one of them smokes Camel, and one of them smokes Newport. Oh, and there's a fourth guy, and he buys a cheap cigar.
Hmm.
Well, I wanted to be on contract with every one of those companies so I could give that customer the best deal. I just was not like, my logo over my store did not say Camel, you know.
I love it. No matter what else you do, you are a retailer at heart. I love it.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was like, hey, you see that sign? And I work for Sunoco. You see that sign? It says Sunoco. It doesn't say Philip Morris. And
Mhm.
I want to give to my customer a buying experience.
Great. So we're coming up on the end of time here. Lou, how can people reach out to you? How can you, if a retailer wants your services or website, email, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Um, I the easiest way would be just to probably email me, and that would be the easiest thing. But my email is not easy. That's the problem. But you know what? I'll give an easy one, and that is loumaiellano@gmail.com. That's not my business one.
Hmm.
My business one is TAZ Market Consult Group at
Good.
AOL.com.
I will also list it so everyone could get it.
So I mean, that's a big way that people reach out to me. And again, I mean, I've written a lot of articles. I've had a lot of shows, and I still love that part of the business.
Good.
And
We're gonna wrap up here because I
yeah,
think we're down to just a few seconds. So I just wanted to give everyone a chance to reach out to you, and we'll get you back on a future podcast.